Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me this morning is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. We want to talk a little bit today about a big boondoggle, and you might even guess a big boondoggle going around this weekend, and it's been around long, and it looks like it's going to be with us, and that has to do with an F-35. And we've talked about this, you know, the waste that's been involved. But a major announcement this week, and they said that not only they recognize it's the most expensive weapon system ever designed in the history of the world, but they also this weekend announced that the Marines announced that it was cleared for combat. It was combat ready. But then if you read in between the lines, it's not quite ready. It's sort of ready, and they have some flaws, which they've had for a long time. You know, it's taken, 3 years longer. It started off at a $200 billion project. It's up to $400 billion that they admit to. And then with projections, I thought it could be up as high as $1 trillion, but you've seen an estimate.
I've seen $1.5 trillion the whole life.
Half trillion. So you want to make any predictions about how well this plane is going to do? Later on in the program, I want to predict how important it is to our insecurity of our country, because I don't think it provides security. But what do you think is going to happen with the plane?
Well, first of all, conceptually, the idea that we are going back to having dogfights and we need fighter planes, it seems a little antiquated. You know, they already, the military claims, and with good reason, that they need to have air support for troops on the ground, regardless of how we feel about a conflict. You need to have that. They've had the A-10 Warthog for the longest time that worked perfectly fine. They tried to kill that because I think they didn't want to take any limelight away from the F-35. But as we talked about before the show, this won't even have a gun until 2017. So here's a fighter jet without a gun. It's almost comical, isn't it?
It's something like what happens when the Army personnel at the bases don't have bullets in their guns, like our military didn't have bullets in their gun in Beirut. So, that is rather sad. But the justification, the way it operates in Washington, high number of dollars being spent on lobbying. And if you ever want to talk about a military-industrial complex working on a weapon, which I see as totally useless and very dangerous to us, because, it is likely to start a war that we don't need. But it's always the threat. There's an enemy out there, and we saw the enemy right on our doorsteps on July 4th. We saw the Russian bombers right on our borders, near California, near Alaska, scare the people, and those individuals who had high stakes in their state or their districts, that we have to have this, we have to have this, are saying, well, there's a threat out there. The Russians and the Chinese are building up their military. And, when I looked at the bomber, it was a Bear bomber, but it was one of those old-fashioned ones, Bear bombers, and it still had props on it. And we need this plane to knock down that Bear bomber. But that was the example of why China and Russia are so bad, and we have to be prepared to go to war against these countries.
And the incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said no longer is Al-Qaeda or ISIS. So the top threat is now Russia and China to the United States, and so they're all sort of working in concert for this. But you mentioned the companies that are making this plane. I was looking at an article before we started. Lockheed Martin, which is one of the chief companies, 82% of all their revenue comes from the taxpayers. In 1 year alone, back in 2012, they spent $15.3 million lobbying politicians. Mm-hmm. So they spend $1 million, and then they get $1 billion in return with something like the F-35.
And the easy solution for this, described by others, is just, ban lobbying to Congress, which I don't endorse, because we're allowed to petition our government. But what has to be banned is having our government having so much control of things they auction off. As long as these contracts are available, there's going to be a lot of money under the table, above the table, or whatever type of coercion goes on. But the big problem is the government is involved. Now, this plane, like I said, I think it's totally unnecessary. $1.5 trillion possibly. The old broken window story and Hazlitt story. Instead of what? If you're spending $1 trillion on this airplane that probably doesn't work and probably just antagonizes people, it's probably basically an offensive weapon. what could be spent? How could this be spent? Nobody stops to think of this. You know, the Keynesians, and this is a Keynesian project. Mm-hmm. This is a military Keynesian project, and they say that whatever is spent is good, but somebody comes up short. And I would like to suggest a few Keynesian economists that I've referenced in the past that this type of spending hasn't done much for our middle class. It doesn't seem to help at all, and I'm not so sure that we're in better shape, you know, for our national security either.
But you know, when we used to live up around Washington, you drive around in places like McLean, and you drive around places like Clifton. You see these huge mansions, and invariably you'll find someone there who is dependent on the military-industrial complex to live in the 1%.
Right, and this is always the argument by the congressman, you know, that it's good for jobs. You can't cut it because it's good for jobs. But it's also the reason you would think that if a good company had to build a good weapon and it was justified and we needed it for defense, I don't think they would build it in 45 different states, different parts from different states. Everybody gets a piece of the action, and even foreign governments get a piece of the action. That, to me, doesn't, you know, add up to efficiency. And of course, that might add up to cost overruns, and they're already, you know, twice as much. And since we don't know when this plane will really fly or why it's going to fly, I think they've been wrong so far for the past 15 years. What makes us think they're going to be right about the projections of either the spending or the efficiency of the airplane?
And if you're thinking about such an intricate flyer functioning properly, I noticed that there are 1,200 different suppliers worldwide who are producing parts for this jet. That seems incredible to me.
Right, and the whole thing is it is a boondoggle. There is no doubt about it, and it is very, very big. And the argument that I'm using that it's not good for us is that you know, a Marine general made a statement I think is important about how he thought of this, because the Marines have and if the first planes are going to the Marines, and they're going to have different versions. The Air Force, the Army, and the Marines are going to get it, and or the Navy. So, but the slogan, the motto for the Marines is first in, first out. Mm-hmm. Macho stuff, big harm if they were defending our country. But he says now, the general says, this allows the Marines to be not only the first to fight, but the first choice for the first to fight. You know, first to fight, it sounds like, you know, if you were defensive, you'd have to be ready. They probably don't mean it the way I'm interpreting it, but that's what it means, I think, literally, because we have been the first to fight and the first to drop the bombs and the first to put on the sanctions and first to punish so many people. So that is why I see the danger, but it's also a danger here at home financially. I pointed out, you know, that all this spending military spending is supposed to help the poor, but why is this one of the contributing factors to the shrinking of the middle class? You know, if those companies you mentioned, they're getting richer, and there's going to be some executives make a lot of money, and the workers are going to get very, very high salaries in there. But that doesn't mean that it filters down to the average person, because that contributes to the inflation, causes the high cost of living, and that's why our middle class is suffering so much.
Speaking of the middle class, you know, one of the candidates for presidency is making a lot of hay lately, talking about the champion of the middle class, and he's all for the middle class and the 90%. But Bernie Sanders has been a big supporter of the F-35. He's admitted that he thinks it's a totally wasteful program, but he says, you know, a big portion of it is built in my hometown of Burlington, Vermont. So he's not going to oppose this jobs-creating program.
He doesn't call himself a member of the Democratic Party. He calls himself a socialist. So I imagine this is consistent with socialism. I mean, socialists have not been resistant to militarism, and of course, he has made statements, and there's some people who still believe that he's maybe less militant and more peaceful than even Obama. But I think these kind of votes and support tells you where he's coming from. Nevertheless, I think him being in the race doesn't hurt one thing. It brings the discussion level up a little bit, you know, for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and you will be hearing more. This is not the last story about the F-35. It's a boondoggle. It's going to get worse. It's up to a prediction of maybe $1 to $1.5 trillion, helping to destroy the middle class, doing nothing to serve the national defense of this country. It's part of a Keynesian military project which is designed nothing more than to support special interests. Eisenhower warned us. Too bad we didn't take the warning. It's time we decided that we defend this country and stay out of entangling alliances and adopt a non-interventionist foreign policy. That is the only road to peace and prosperity. That is the position I support. I want to thank everybody today for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.